Please remain standing for today's gospel reading. The reading is taken from the Gospel of Luke, the 14th chapter, verses 25 through 33. Now large crowds were traveling with him, and he turned and he said to them, "Whoever comes to me and does not hate father and mother, wife and children, brothers and sisters, yes, and even life itself, cannot be my disciple. Whoever does not carry the cross and follow me cannot be my disciple. For which of you, intending to build a tower, does not first sit down and estimate the cost to see whether he has enough to complete it? Otherwise, when he has laid a foundation and is not able to finish, all who see it will begin to ridicule him, saying, 'This fellow began to build and was not able to finish.' Or what king, going out to wage war against another king, will not sit down first and consider whether he is able with 10,000 to oppose the one who comes against him with 20,000? If he cannot then, while the other is still far away, he sends a delegation and asks for the terms of peace. So therefore, none of you can become my disciple if you do not give up all your possessions." This is the word of God for the people of God. Thanks be to God. Please be seated. So, many of us have been asked the question, on a scale of 0 to 10, how would you rate X? So on a scale of 0 to 10, how would you rate your service during your stay at our hotel? On a scale of 0 to 10, how would you rate your meal at our restaurant? On a scale of 0 to 10, how would you rate your pain level? You get the idea. We use scales or meters to gauge our feelings about many things. Today, Jesus has some tough words for would-be disciples. On a scale of 0 to 10, how much are we willing to give up to follow Christ? So let's set the context for today's gospel reading. It continues Luke's travel narrative as Jesus moves ever toward his crucifixion. The passage before this is the parable of the banquet, in which invited guests find many excuses for not attending. The host is persistent in filling his table, so he recruits persons who are poor and lame, as well as persons from the countryside. Now keep in mind that the banquet represents the kingdom, and the excuses are the things to which people are attached and interfere with our commitment to God. There's a large crowd traveling with Jesus. It is important to not forget the crowd as a character in this story. Watch their reactions in the travel narrative. On the crowd support meter, they begin as a 10, move to a 4 or 5 during the journey, and end as a 0, calling for his death. If we were traveling in this crowd, where would we register on this meter? Jesus addresses the crowd with 3 parallel statements in verses 26, 27, and 33 about the nature of discipleship. The first 2 are signaled by the word whoever. The first statement in verse 26 indicates that if one does not hate their family, she or he cannot, may not be a disciple. Now wait, is Jesus telling us to hate our parents, our children, our siblings? No, he is not. Jesus is speaking in hyperbole, as he often does, to make a point about priorities. Jesus' point is that we must love Jesus more than any other. We must make discipleship a priority. On a scale of 0 to 10, where is our priority for loving Jesus more than anything or anyone and becoming his disciple? The second discipleship statement in verse 27 includes the familiar idea of taking up the cross. The present tense carry tends to stress the everydayness of this identification with Jesus. Again, if we do not pick up the cross, we cannot be a disciple of Jesus. The third discipleship statement in verse 33 is an inclusive statement. Give up all of your possessions. We have to make a choice. Remember the banquet, the guests and their excuses? Our excuses, our things become seductive fairly easily. They become masters rather than servants. Traveling is difficult if we take along excess baggage. On a scale of 0 to 10, how important are our possessions? Between the second and third of these discipleship statements, Luke includes two analogies, feasibility studies, really. The first is about a building project. The second is about assessing resources before going to war. The point of their inclusion is to remind us that a hasty or casual decision could leave us vulnerable. We must have eyes that are wide open to the cost of discipleship. On a scale of 0 to 10, how would we rate the feasibility of discipleship? Let's look for a few moments at the building project analogy. If we were going to begin a building project, let's say a major remodel of our home, would we simply go to the store and buy some lumber and some other supplies, come home and begin sawing and hammering? No, of course not. In my own world of sewing and quilting, and I think, Lucille, you would agree, you measure twice to cut once, so as not to waste fabric. The Sagrada Familia is a Roman Catholic church under construction in Barcelona, Spain. It is the dream of architect Antoni Gaudí. The cornerstone of the church was laid when Queen Victoria was Britain's monarch and Chester Alan Arthur was President of the United States. More than 140 years after beginning this building project, construction continues. The first Mass in the church was said in 2010. The basilica is expected to be completed in 2026. Maybe we should all go. Gaudí worked on this project for 43 years, with the last 12 years of his life focused on this project and nothing else. Say what you will, there is no denying that Gaudí's dedication to this project was off the scale. In his tenacity for this building project, Gaudí showed commitment, sacrifice, and generosity. These three things are what Jesus tells the crowd and is telling us today are needed if we are to be his disciples. Now, I admit I'm a tennis junkie, especially when the 4 major professional tennis tournaments are on TV. And currently, the U.S. Open, played in Flushing Meadow, New York, is concluding. The women's final was yesterday. The men's is this afternoon. On another day, we can debate the issue of professional sports, but in watching these athletes, they demonstrate exactly what Jesus was saying to the crowd traveling with him. The commitment of these men and women is amazing. They spend hours practicing, hours in the gym conditioning, hours studying opponents and constructing strategy. When they finish a match, they don't take a shower and go home. They go to the gym and ride the exercise bike and review tape of the match. They are committed to being the best they can be. On a scale of 0 to 10, their commitment must be a 10, or they will not win these top tournaments. If we want to be Jesus' disciple, we must be committed to Jesus being number one in our lives. Jesus must take precedent over our families, our jobs, our hobbies, over everything. On a scale of 0 to 10, how committed are we? These athletes sacrifice much to become the best in the game. As teens, many leave home to stay at one of the tennis academies. They travel a lot. They have to pay their dues, so to speak, by playing in qualifying events and minor tournaments. They do not have time for hobbies. Persons may delay marriage and children to continue playing. Jesus says we must take up the cross. We must make a sacrifice to follow him. On a scale of 0 to 10, how willing are we to make the necessary sacrifice to be a disciple? Many of these top athletes are generous. They give much money to charity, or they have a foundation that provides for research and gifts to a particular cause. We too are asked to be generous. We are asked to give away our possessions. Jesus calls us to love our neighbors, to feed them, to clothe them, and to heal them. Most of us find that when we share our wealth, we receive much more than we give. On a scale of 0 to 10, how generous are we? In The Cost of Discipleship, Lutheran pastor Dietrich Bonhoeffer says, quote, "Costly grace is the gospel which must be sought again and again and again. The gift which must be asked for, the door at which a man must knock. Such grace is costly because it calls us to follow, and it is grace because it calls us to follow Jesus Christ. It is costly because it costs a man his life, and it is grace because it gives a man the only true life. It is costly because it condemns sin, and grace because it justifies the sinner. Above all, it is costly because it cost God the life of his Son. Ye were bought at a price. And what has cost God much cannot be cheap for us. Above all, it is grace because God did not reckon his Son too dear a price to pay for our lives, but delivered him up for us. Costly grace is the incarnation of God," end quote. My friends, this is the good news of the gospel. Jesus offers us the invitation to receive his grace, to follow him, and be a disciple. It's not a spectator sport. It is not for the faint of heart to be a disciple. But when we answer yes, we will be richly rewarded. Come, take up the cross and follow him.